I'm delighted we have Judith Heumann, a globally recognized champion for civil rights, to open up our conversation on the lived experience of disability as it relates to disability justice and human rights. Judy's been at the forefront of every major struggle to redefine what the rights are and how to radically change the world towards a world that respects all of our dignities, a world of inclusion. Let's see what she has to say. Judy Heumann, you're one of the most dynamic and incredible leaders. You helped shape the way the world looks, the way the world feels. Your advocacy is so beautifully documented in the film Crip Camp and in your book. But most importantly, you've been a longtime friend. I wanted to have this short chat with you to get a sense of the feelings and experiences that you've had. And I wanted to start in terms of the specific feelings that you encountered in your fight for disability justice and disability rights. What does that experience feel like?
There are people like me in every city around the world. And the issue is whether or not government and the private sector want to engage with people like Victor and myself. Because if you want to engage with people, there are people there. You may not want to hear what people have to say. You may not want to be pushing as quickly as they need to, but there is no excuse in any city around the world to say there are not people out there to work with you. For me, as a younger disabled person, in a time where there were no laws granting rights to disabled people in the United States, even at the city levels, and certainly around the world, one of the important factors for me was beginning to recognize, A, that cities could be made accessible. There didn't need to be a step at the end of a corner. There was something called a ramp. There were elevators. There were all these things that were put in, but they were put in at the whim of the community. They didn't really look from a universal perspective at who were all the members of the community. And the members of the community included people like myself who are wheelchair users. In the beginning, for me, it was very important to begin to identify and begin to work with other disabled individuals who had knowledge and experience and were fighting for accessibility. So in my case, I'm 72 now, it's 2020. The first people I really started working with who were really knowledgeable about issues around accessibility were disabled veterans. And what was important for me was to learn, A, what a standard was, and B, how to really fight for the best standard, and C, and maybe this is A, really feeling empowered, that I had, whether or not other people felt it was my right and the rights of millions of other disabled people to be navigating communities and being able to be integrated, we were really learning that we needed to speak up for ourselves, that there was every excuse in the world why our cities couldn't be made more accessible. But at the end of the day, it was the lack of will. And I think it's ultimately people still, even today in 2020, not really valuing the fact that the failure to universally design a city across the board excludes people within those communities who have valuable contributions to make.
What kind of emotion do you think was linked to your advocacy? Was it frustration? Was it anger? Was it impatience?
I mean, I would say in some way it was everything. But I think at the end of the day, it was really empowerment. It was really being able to get over this hump of being afraid to challenge authority, of being afraid to speak up. And I think, you know, what's different today than in the 1960s, today, you know, you do have ISO standards on accessibility. There are all kinds of standards that have been developed around the world, in ICT, et cetera. And there is no longer the excuse, we don't know. But there is so much out there that really now it's the will. it's the belief that all people need to be able to participate to their maximum capacity, and that the people who are the naysayers need to be moved aside. And the leaders of cities and countries need to be clear that they will accept the word no longer.
That's a very powerful statement. When you actually heard the word no, and you heard the word delay, and you heard the word let's wait, let's do this later. How did those experiences manifest in your life? Just talk about some of the biggest milestones or feelings that you encountered, or maybe tell us a little bit about what were some of the biggest changes that you're most proud of, and what are some of the challenges that you see ahead?
I feel that one of the major successes that has been going on around the world is the fact that it is very common now for disabled people to understand that we are no longer begging, that there are laws, as the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that unfortunately our country has not yet ratified, and the growth of our movement being translated into laws that are requiring that disabled children have the right to go to school, that universities may not discriminate against disabled people in admissions policies. And those two changes really have resulted from people like yourself and me.
And so what's the call to action? Because a lot of people want to understand, kind of build back better. What does that mean? Or they want to understand what inclusive and accessible cities should look like. What kind of call to action do you have?
Well, I think, for me, my call to action is the disability community and leadership need to be working together. We need to be working with the broad spectrum of people who are going to be essential in the redesigning of our cities to ensure that disability is appropriately integrated. There needs to be a level of confidence that people have that we need to push as hard as we can, and that leadership should expect that and welcome it. And the reason I say that is, in many communities, historically and still today, people are afraid, how far do I push? People are afraid of not being invited back to the table. There has to be confidence that people will be invited to the table. People need to bring their knowledge and substance. With the demonstrations in San Francisco in 1977 around a US law where we were fighting to get regulations signed by the Carter administration, we finally said, we will not compromise any further. And I think our resilience to, in fact, say we will compromise no further, being able to explain what we had done previously, the compromises that we had made, and why we believe that any further compromises would truly adversely affect the law, that made a difference. So you need to know your principles, you need to know your bottom line, and you need to be respectful that what you're saying is something that's valuable.
Thank you so much for joining us, Judy. I think that every time that you speak, I call you a national treasure. Get a global gift for moving us one step closer to justice. Thank you.